you've been in this kind of field of psychedelics and ethnopharmacology for many decades now. So maybe a good place to start would be at the beginning. And how was it that your interest in ethnopharmacology came about in the first place?
Okay, well, I'll try to make it a short version, but basically, most of your audiences know that I'm Terence McKenna's younger brother. He was 4 years older than I am, so in a lot of ways, he led me down the path of, the path of perdition, some would say, but he led the charge in terms of our interest in psychedelics. I am a true child of the 60s. I was born in 1950, so my teenage years, growing up years was, exactly fitted into the 1960s. And of course, that's when the interest in the counterculture and particularly LSD and other psychedelics, even began to emerge in society. And we were fascinated by them. Terence and I were both big science fiction fans at the time, still am. But that was kind of the perspective that we approached this from. Not really from the idea of shamanism originally or spirituality. We were like, wow, these things can transport you to other dimensions. That was kind of the way we conceived it. And then we discovered DMT, and that really kind of confirmed it, because if you're familiar with DMT, you know that it basically puts you into, its own reality. It's almost as though it replaces this reality. And it was much more interesting to us than LSD. LSD was interesting enough, but DMT seemed like a whole order of magnitude, weirdness and just intrinsic interest, than LSD. And so we became kind of obsessed with that. And we went to South America in 1971 to Colombia initially in search of an exotic hallucinogen called ukuhe. It was a Witoto Witoto tribe that made an orally active preparation from Varroa, which is a genus of trees. The sap contains high levels of tryptamines, and lots of tribes in the Amazon make snuffs out of that. And that's for good reason, because those tryptamines are not orally active unless they're potentiated with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And that, of course, is the basis of ayahuasca pharmacology. Combination of a DMT-containing admixture with Banisteriopsis, the liana that supplies the beta-carbolines, which are MAO inhibitors. In 1971, we didn't know any of that. Nobody really knew that at that time. It's only around that time it emerged, mostly through work with Schulte's graduate students who were out in the field working on ayahuasca, that these admixture plants were important. Ayahuasca was known before, but it wasn't understood really how important the admixtures were. And we didn't know this when we went to Colombia in 1971. So we had stumbled on a paper called Varroa as an orally active hallucinogen by Schultes, where it reported on this drug called ukuhe. And as we experimented with synthetic DMT back in Berkeley and Boulder at the time, we were very impressed by it. I mean, who wouldn't be impressed by it? But we were also frustrated because the effect was so short. And we wanted something that would last longer. So, we naively thought that, if you had an orally active form, it would last longer. This is true. We know this from ayahuasca. Anyway, we went off on this wild goose chase looking for ukuhe in 1971. And we eventually found it. It turned out not to be that exciting, but what we found in lieu of that, when we went to La Chorrera, this place where there was essentially the ancestral home of the Witoto. What we found, because of a pure accident really, when we got to La Chorrera after a rather harrowing trip down rivers and across, trails and so on, was that they cleared pastures around that little mission village. They brought in cattle, and along with the cattle came the psilocybin mushroom, the Psilocybe cubensis, which of course loves to grow on the dung of zebu cattle or any other cattle that happened to be available. So mushrooms were everywhere. And it was a rainy season, and we thought, wow, this is great. We knew what they were. We didn't have much experience with them. We'd had like one previous encounter with them on our way into La Chorrera, a fairly light dose. We thought, wow, these are a lot of fun, And so we kind of said, well, this will be great to play. We can play with this. We can enjoy these while we're looking for the real secret, this ukuhe. Well, we started taking rather high doses rather regularly, and the mushrooms pretty well very quickly made it clear they were the secret. They were the ones that we needed to pay attention to, and so we did. And they started downloading a lot of crazy information, and I won't go into that. You can read about it in my book or Terrence's book, and we'd never get out of this podcast if I went into it. But suffice to say that it reorganized our priorities rather profoundly, right. And really made us wonder, about just about everything, the nature of reality. When we got back to the States, we wrote The Invisible Landscape, which laid out all of these theories, in as scientific a way as we could. Turned out most of it was not really valid. But the one thing we did do that made a difference, we brought spores back with us from La Chorrera, and we figured out how to grow these things. And that is what really, if there was a major gift from that trip, that was it. It was bringing the spores, learning how to grow the mushrooms, a very simple way, and then sharing that information with the world. And I think it had a big impact. Yeah. Obviously it has, because if you look at the situation now, like psilocybin is, practically it's the superstar of this effort to right. bring psychedelics into clinical use. But so that was 71. In 1981, I returned to South America, this time to Peru, as a graduate student, this time at the University of British Columbia, with a much less, much more realistic agenda, rather than making a discovery that would change the world and shatter the structure of reality. I just wanted to do ethnobotany and, keep my feet on the ground. And I did that. And I made the focus of my graduate work essentially a comparison of the pharmacology and chemistry and botanical sources of ayahuasca compared to ukuhe, this other one. And that was the focus of my thesis. And I guess it was good enough to get the degree. I did get the degree, and then I spent several years as a postdoc in different places. And here we are, that was a long time ago. That was nearly 50 years ago right there. Yeah. So wow. 50 years ago? No, 40 years ago. Yeah.